this is technically about the Sea of Darkness, but I'm sure that the issues will overlap and intersect fairly well. As people are settling down, let me just so a word of thanks once again to Sean Thompson, Michael Oblowitz, Keiko Beatty, and to the staff of the University of California Humanities Research Institute who made this all possible. And we'll spend about an hour going through the panel. The format will be much the same as it was before. So Tom, why don't you start, and then I'll go to Rory. And
hey, aloha kako apau, o poaku ke ali ahonu o kalane ana olu o Kahio Stone, my Hawaii ne. So that's just a quick introduction of who I am. Actually, everybody knows me in the surfing world as Tom Stone, but I really don't go by that name. Let me see what else. It's great to be at UCLA. I have never been here. It's a beautiful campus. Mahalo for the opportunity to be here, David. I'm also a professor at the University of Hawaii, and my area of expertise is Hawaiian history, language, and traditional sports. So I was kind of like freaking out listening to stuff. A lot of people, Fred's a good guy. I love him for who he is, but go back to school. I did. Anything else you need to know about me? I don't know what I'm doing here, man. Really. Oh, yeah, because Mike asked me to be here, so did David. And I guess I have some expertise in drugs, and I knew, like Rory, we knew Mike Boyle very well. Rasmussen, yeah, they're all friends of ours. I call them friends, no matter what happened. Yeah, so I guess that's why I'm going to address Sea of Darkness for you in the way I understand it culturally and how it impacted my way of life, right? Because I walked down the same road as Mike and Rick Rasmussen and a lot of those, Jeff and those guys. Definitely, I just kind of survived. That's about it.
Greg Escalante, artist.
Yeah, I was impressed by Sea of Darkness because I was a surfer, but not a big-name superstar surfer that I saw here, and I've seen actually here. It seems like more interesting surfers than I've ever seen anywhere in my life, so it's kind of mind-blowing. But I was attracted to this film when I saw it because it told a story that actually seemed like it would probably never be told. There's no way, there's no market, there's no sponsorship, and maybe people don't want to see it because they're going to see the dark, gnarly, evil side of surfing like they didn't even know it existed. And just over the years, because I've been around for a long time, I couldn't help but hearing some of these stories. And, stories like from the last film, busting down the door about all that stuff that happened on the North Shore, but never really hearing the whole story, so it's so great that film told the whole story. And then this film told the story, and I probably wouldn't even know about it if it wasn't for a Surfer's Journal article that was a profile on Mike Boyum. And that was pretty mind-blowing, just what I could remember from that story. And when I'm watching the movie, I'm thinking like, man, I've heard that name. I know that guy. And the one from the Journal is about how he finally made it to the Philippines. He's burnt all his friends. He, it's like this master faster and ends up killing himself from fasting, which I don't know, Michael, but was it like a Kafka story about the guy that was in the carnival, and he could fast for all these, days, and finally he just went too far, So, yeah, it's just like you can't believe it. But this was like the real life Kafka story, and and it's interesting. I'm just going to tell this part of it. It's interesting the way I got to see this film, because this is, like I said, this is a film that it's hard to even watch. It's hard to find out where it's playing. I don't know how much you've gotten it out there. But I know this guy named Mike Stice, and he was showing this film at his college in Laguna, LCAD, art college, and he told me about it, you know, because maybe he was going to do something with me, and I could come early and see Michael's film. And then I thought, like, wait a minute, I know that name. I know Michael's name. So I had met him because I went and saw a film that I guess a mutual friend of ours made called Spawn that was about meth freaks. And Michael pulls up, and he's in a car, and he's got all these surfboards out of it, and he had just been surfing Malibu. And anyway, he was just this wild personality. And so I thought, wow, here's a chance to meet that guy again. You know? So I'll finish my little spiel up in a minute. But the thing that was good, that of course wasn't shown in this movie, and you know, you can't get a feel of it, is when he walked in to that class and the students were there, he started like giving them a lecture that I think went for about at least 25 minutes. That was just almost like politically incorrect, where he was talking about politicians and who they should vote for, and just like the wildest stuff ever, but really maybe the best speech I'd ever heard. So I think he's got some real talent, and he made a cool film, and we can go to the next guy.
Jim Kempton.
My name's Jim Kempton, and I think I got asked to come here because back in a past life I was the editor and then publisher of Surfer Magazine, and therefore knew all of these characters during this era. But funnily enough, both of these films have a personal relationship to me. One is that in 1974 I was actually in Bali. I didn't meet any of those guys, but I met a lot of other people who were there. And then later, much later, after the Indies Trader had turned into a Quicksilver crossing boat, I was the director of that boat that you saw sailing around those waters for about 4 years at Quicksilver through a great deal of the world. And the same thing goes, I guess, before I was at Surfer with Busting Down the Door. I was actually at Surfer when Rabbit wrote that story, but before that, I was on the North Shore just as a punk kid going surfing and wanting to be where all the action was, and so was able to witness what went on there, and made sure I didn't talk about it. That's I think that's why they invited me here.
Paul Holmes.
Hi, my name's Paul Holmes, and actually this guy sitting next to me, Jim Kempton, when he was publisher of Surfer, hired me to be editor at Surfer. So we're in sequence here. This was the order of events. I was at an event a few weeks ago and picked up this bumper sticker. It says, "Surfing ruined my life." And, you know, in a sense, it is ironic. It's supposed to be funny. But, you know, in a sense, all of the things we've been discussing here today kind of do pertain to people's obsessions and addictions to surfing. And some of the complications that ensue thereafter. I know for me it did, because I grew up in England, and it started surfing in the very early 60s, at a time when there was probably only 24 people surfing in the entire country. We were kind of out there in no man's land as far as surfing was concerned. We had to make our own wetsuits. I mean, that's how crude it was. But nevertheless, I mean, as a 13, 14-year-old, I became totally obsessed with surfing. I did manage to finish my grammar school education. And as I did so, people around me who, you know, my parents and teachers and the grammar school principal kept saying to me, "You know, surfing's going to ruin your life." I heard that so many times I can't even tell you. But I was determined to somehow make it the central focus of my life, in the same way that everybody you've seen up here today has made it the central focus of their lives. The thing was, in the late 60s and early 70s, there really weren't too many options in terms of how to make surfing the central focus of your life, how to schedule everything in your life around the waves and the tides, and still make a living. How could you do that? There just weren't that many options. You could be a surfboard maker, a surfboard shaper. You could be a surfing magazine journalist, or work at a surfing magazine, or make a movie, perhaps, and make some money making a movie. But beyond that, there were severe limitations. Now, all of this is going on at a time when surfing is starting to ripple out. It did for me. I moved from England to Australia in 1973, and I worked in making surfboards. I worked at a surf magazine. Ultimately, I became the contest promoter and director of the 2SM Coca-Cola Surf About, which was one of the first world tour events in Sydney, and actually at the time the richest pro contest in the world. And at the same time all this is going on, people are going to different places, finding new places to surf. And of course, you know, wherever that happens, this whole globalization and this clash of cultures starts to come into play. In those days, in the early 70s and the mid-70s, what surf travel meant for most people was a backpack and a surfboard and an air ticket and your passport, some money, head off into the world and find some place to go surfing. I mean, we used to pore over the maps looking at places to surf. No, there wasn't any information. There was no internet, of course. You know, it was like we were flying blind. But what happened was when you go to a place like Bali or Java or many other places, you know, in Africa or Morocco, whatever, inevitably you were dependent on the local people to house you and feed you, and, you know, kind of, you really had to interact with the local culture in order to find those places to surf. So I do remember being in Bali, probably about the same time Jim was, 74, 75. I met Mike Boyum. I thought he was a creepy guy. I mean, really did. You know, the whole vibe of him was like weird. You know, I couldn't explain exactly why, but he just seemed like a really creepy person. And at that time, they were just setting up the camp at G-Land. And I remember, you know, I was talking to some buddies about, they want $100 a day to go there to surf. They're out of their mind. It was anathema to us. Those of us who were out there on the road looking for places to surf with a backpack and a board, paying some guy, some American guy, $100 a day to go surfing, out of the question. We never went, just simply because of that. And at that time, there was plenty of good surfing to be had just on Bali, you know, at Uluwatu or Padang or Nusa Dua or Sanur. I mean, there was plenty of good places to surf. It hadn't become crowded. Kuta Beach was a little fishing village. There were no discos. There wasn't even electricity. Once the sun went down, it was a dark little town. So I think it's really kind of interesting, many of the topics that have been brought up with both of these movies. The commercialization of surfing and the professionalization of surfing and the whole way that surfing has rippled out of late, exported to many, many countries around the world and sort of imprinted mostly with the marketing messages of the big surfwear companies, has had a profound effect, I think, on surfing. And, you know, what's kind of ironic about these boat trips is, you know, you pay your way, you go meet the boat in some place, you jump on the boat, you looked after, you eat frozen food out of the fridge, you don't interact with the local people at all. And that's really created some serious problems in some areas. In Bali, when people started first surfing Uluwatu, Uluwatu was a dirt poor village of the worst order. I mean, poverty ruled. It was in a bad part of the island. They didn't have much water. And actually, coming of surfing to Uluwatu changed the lives of the people who lived in that village and made them prosperous. It's a really complicated story, but I think it's really good that UCLA is hosting this event. It's about time some of these issues were discussed, and I applaud the people who are putting this on. Thank you very much.
Just a point of correction, we're physically located at UCLA, but the event is actually sponsored by a University of California-wide research institute. This is just the location we managed to choose. Jericho, Poppler.
Hi everybody. I'm in the wrong movie. No, not really. Not really. No, I love this. I really love your movie, Michael, because it made me scared. Because I remember as a young woman growing up in the sport of surfing, and I was in the sport of it, but I was in the traveling part of it too. And I went to a lot of these places, and what was I doing there? But it's because I wanted to surf these waves, and I wasn't thinking about, these guys or anybody else. I just wanted to do that. I grew up in Long Beach, California, 5 brothers, and I'm the only girl. And I could have done any sport. I grew up dancing all my life. I decided after, watching weird movies from Gidget to whatever, hey, this is what I want to do. And I've danced all my life. I'm involved with the arts. But what happened is I grew up with all these boys, and my dad, he said, just do what you want to do. So I wanted to surf. I wanted to dance on these waves all over the world. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I did it, and I'm still doing it. And what I saw in your movie is the addiction of riding waves, and whatever it takes or took in your movie and in the Bustin' Boys movie. It's like we were all doing, there were very few women, but we were all doing whatever it would take for us to fulfill our addiction of riding waves. And so I don't want to talk about women issues because that's slim surface stuff compared to what you guys are really getting at. It's like we were all there, like PT said. We wanted to make surfing our lives, and we had whatever it took to say, okay, it's a clothing line, or we're going to be a contest director, like Paul was way ahead of his time doing that, the way he structured stuff. Or Fred, God bless Fred, we all just did the best we knew how from the parents and the situations and the cultures that we were coming from. South Africa, all these different cultures, and we all still to this day share that joy of riding what is a wave, a freaking vibration from a storm that nobody owns out there in the ocean. It hits Australia, it hits Hawaii, it hits California, but we're after that joy. And so I have a lot of passion for my brothers here, my brother surfers. And I have admiration also for those weird guys that were doing whatever they could in your movie. Really. It wasn't moral or ethical, I don't think. But that's what they did to ride waves. So I don't know if anybody has any questions for me, but we can talk story later.
Rory Russell.
Hello, everybody. My name is Roy Russell, and I was born in Germany. My father was a very highly decorated Army colonel. We got sent to Hawaii in 1964, August 4th, first time I stepped foot in the Hawaiian Islands. I didn't go there on purpose. I wanted to be a baseball player. But yeah, I ran away from home because I was going to Hawaii. Thank God I didn't make it. But yeah, and so as far as, culture and lifestyles and everything, there's probably no more bigger opposite end of the spectrum than having a highly decorated military officer having a pro surfer for a son. It was kind of hard for us to see eye to eye, but he was always out fighting wars, so we never had a chance to see eye to eye that much, which is a shame. As far as the cultural thing, there's two sides to every story, and it's a catch-22. We're talking about the Hawaiian culture, the Australian culture, but basically we're all talking about the same culture, and that's the culture we all share is surfing. Everybody has sat here and everybody has talked about the greatest feeling in their life is surfing, and it is true. I was on a very rigid pleasure program for a number of years, and it caught up to me 5 years ago, and I literally died from congestive heart failure. You guys saw me in Australia that time. Whew. Anyhow, thank God that the doctor was a surfer and recognized me, and got two other doctors in, and they worked for 3.5 hours, and basically you could say I saw the light. But they say 1 out of 1,000 makes it from where I was. But you know what? When I was there, the most important thing was my friends and surfing. It was something that saved my life. And as far as, the cultural, the excitement of it, I have a surfing school. I teach surfing, and I have everybody sign my guest book. And I bet everything that they wrote in that book, we've all felt. Roses are red, violets are blue. Rory made me stand up and saved my life too. The greatest feeling of my entire life, even my marriage, you name it. And it's true, It doesn't matter how good a surfer you are. The best surfer in the water is the one who's having the most fun. And we all know that part, So this cultural and this competition thing was good for the essence of professional surfing. Which is really good, because then that helps alleviate the drug culture, which is basically was brought about because if you're going to surf, you got to commit 100% all the time. So you can't hold a regular job. I mean, half the guys that I grew up with that were good surfers that I went to high school with, as soon as they got out of high school, they stopped surfing. That was the end of their surfing career. They got married. They had a local kid. They married a local girl. They had local kids, and they had to provide for their family. Okay, now basically the only way that the surfers that they would come from other places, the only way they could come to the North Shore and exist in a comfortable lifestyle was to bring drugs, bring drugs to Hawaii and sell it to the locals, and we'll take their money and live off their land and steal their waves or whatever, So it was, it itself was a culture. I could tell you stories of nightmares, that I've been at both ends of the gun. Huh? I know. We both did. And like Fred Hemming said, this kid, Rusty Starr.
Rusty was a good friend.
Rusty Starr was a very good friend of mine. He was born the day before I was. And my friend came by my house. I was at Fat Paul's house. My friend Bill Lacey came by and said, Rusty died last night. I just went by your mom's house. Your mom told me Rusty died last night shooting cocaine. Couldn't wait to go home for dinner that night. But I tell you, it was a wake-up call, We all have addictions. We all have wants. We all have needs. It's a matter of knowing your limitations and what's good for you and what's bad and what's good for your surroundings, for your environment, the people that you deal with, as far as whether it's alcohol or drugs or anything, It's all out there. It's all out there. It's up to you to know how much you want out of life and how much love you've got to give and how much you want to share that, so that you don't blow it, we've all been right there, man. I've been right there, and thank God I didn't blow it, And I'm still here, and I'm surfing again, man. I lost 80 pounds. I used to be 250 pounds. Yes, you were. But yeah, man. And I'm fucking ripped, too. If I would have known I was still with this kid at this age, I would have never stopped. Frickin' Lopez told me to retire gracefully. Never listen to him again.
Rory, you were at G-Land early on. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, we went to Boyum. Boyum was a very arrogant guy. He was a devil, basically. He had a devilish grin. He was in it for himself, He wanted to charge $100 to go surfing, which for us is absurd, because it's free. But Boyum had his own agenda and what he was doing, and he really liked to be in the limelight and be the center of attention. And like I said, you know, the way to make a living without having to work, smuggle drugs. You know, there's so many drug smugglers came to the North Shore over all the years. You'd be surprised the names that pop up. But that's neither here nor there now, you know. The main thing is that we all keep focused on the surfing aspect of life and then, you know, follow through on that, man. And we'll all stay here and be happy and groove and have fun. That's about all I have to say. Just stay surfing, man. Just stay in the water.
The period that both films address, really the early 1970s to the early 1980s, is a period of, you could say, quite dramatic transition in surfing culture and surfing lifestyle from one of a kind of countercultural, travel the world on your own dime kind of phenomenon, looking for adventure and waves and an experience of youth, mainly young men, and so on, seeking things out, to a period after that, which is really about the globalization of surf culture and a surf industry and its commercialization in some sense. I just want to pose a general question to the panel about I mean, we've addressed some of the complex issues that are associated with that transition, but I wonder if you can, you can begin to talk and tease out some of the concerns in relation to each of the two movies as they go along. So maybe Jim.
Well, I think what you saw in both of these movies that I think was the common thread was that it was a period in which surfing had come of age or was trying to come of age. The question that all of us were saying to one another is, how do we keep doing this? Because in the previous time, when I was 10, I saw Gidget, and people who were older made fun of Gidget, but if you were 10, it was the greatest. I mean, after I'd seen Gidget, I didn't want to be an astronaut, I didn't want to be a cowboy, I didn't want to be a policeman, I wanted to be a surfer. That movie changed my life because when I saw it, that's all I wanted to do. But what I didn't like was the ending. The ending was, at the end of the summer, the one guy went back to work and the other guy went back to college. Well, I'd already graduated from college. So I wanted to know, how do you keep doing what they were doing that summer all the time? And I think that's what everybody my age was trying to figure out. We were trying to figure out how to do that. So in a certain sense, we invented this culture and we invented this industry because we wanted it to succeed. And funnily enough, people talk about America and competition, but in the surfing world, if you look at the development of the surfing industry, it was all about cooperation. Everybody wanted everyone to succeed because if they succeeded, it meant maybe you could. And so whether you were a surfboard manufacturer or a contest director or an editor of a magazine, or you sold clothes or you made board shorts, whatever it took, you made movies, everyone was out there trying to be able to make a living and still do what we all love to do. And that development is really the sort of first inklings of what the surf industry was to become, a billion dollar industry that was worldwide. And before the contests came about, there was a whole other structure of how you sort of made your way in surfing. Had you surfed Bali, had you surfed Labar and Biarritz, had you surfed Noosa Heads, there were these places in the world that you were supposed to go and you were supposed to find, and then you were supposed to find new ones. And that was sort of what we were all out there doing. And when the professionalism came along, what it opened up was a lot of opportunities for everyone to get a job.
Sorry.
I think the basic thing that we're talking about right here, and I don't think very many people know this, is there is one single greatest invention in surfing that has created this giant population of surfers. Does anybody know what that is? You got it, the leg rope. When I first saw the leg rope at Chun's, I was paddling out with Jim Sutherland. I saw this guy fall up, his board popped up, fall off in the wave, his board popped up next to him. I said, God, that guy's lucky, his board popped up right next to him. I paddled back out, the guy fell off and his board had popped up right next to him. I go, that guy's really lucky, his board popped up. And then I saw the bracelet, the anklet on his thing, and surfing was over for me then, because I knew it would just get so crowded, and that's why nobody has to swim like we used to have to swim. You swim at sunset, you lose your board at sunset at the takeoff, you're out of the water for half an hour, 20 minutes, right? You know, with a leg rope, you're right back in the lineup, you know? So basically, surfers never got to get discouraged. See, if I would have had to grow up in California, I probably would have never surfed because it's too cold. Without a leg rope, no way, you know? But with the, you know, the invention of the leg rope, man, you fall off, you're right back up. It helped with the design of the surfboard. The guy could ride the same wave more often, helped with the production of the surfboard. It was the biggest single factor in surfing and making it as big as it is today. And it led to the position where Jim was just saying, we can make the trunks for all those surfers. We can make the T-shirts for all those surfers that are now wanting to jump in the water and share the fun.
You know, I want to try to bring the two movies together because they were basically about the same thing. And that's this, you know, this pop culture that originates out of a founding culture, right? So there's like levels of that permeate, you know, from a tradition that was just a way of life because no matter what, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about what the origins of surfing, for example. Trust me, it began in Hawaii, and that's that. You know, unless somebody, you know, because, hey, you know what, I spent too much time with the magazines and everybody else arguing them, you know, but the one thing you got to produce is the artifact. If you don't have the artifact, you could say anything you want, but you can never, you know, produce the foundation to support your hypothesis. And that's the fact, is that we have all the stories and we have all the physical evidence of it. So surfing is from Hawaii. It's a gift to the world that, from the Australian point of view, that Duke brings to them, right? And that's founded on something that he did as a way of life. And it's that way of life that goes forward, and it becomes the foundation from which everybody else embraces surfing. And surfing becomes, you know, a tradition based on a culture that creates another culture. And that's what we all belong to. And I'm not only a native, but I come from the same roots as everybody else that surfs, right? We're all surfers of a contemporary time period. But it's that foundation. And from that, everybody's looking for a way of life, like the Gidget story, right? That's technically, who's that guy, man, the big guy that played with her all the time on the Big Kahuna, right? So that's Greg Noll, right? Really, it's all about Greg Noll and those guys. Yeah? And they're coming to Hawaii and embracing all this stuff. But it's having that way of life that's founded on a native way of life. And I'm not saying it was Greg Noll. I'm just saying that the imagery produced, maybe Greg Noll took that from the Gidget movies. Who knows? But it's that foundation that everybody steps onto and begins to leap into the future of surfing. And from it, there's, the loss of the nativeness becomes the connection to how do you live and be a surfer without competitive roots in you, but the roots that's founded on a cultural practice. So drugs becomes a very unique way of, taking care of your addiction to surf as many ways as you can and go as many places. And, Rory's right. Without naming names, we know a lot of very influential people in Hawaii today that made their way on drugs. I mean, it's just the way it was. I mean, the flow of drug traffic into Hawaii out of the West through Honolulu and Maui and stuff like that was phenomenal. I was there. I was part of it. I knew Mike. I knew the guys. I knew Eddie, that Fred hates vehemently, and I could say Eddie's name. Eddie was in the movie. I mean, he was there. But, hey, somebody better have a bottle of beer or something, man, if you keep dropping bottles. I know, yeah. But, that's the connection between the two movies, is looking at changes on one side, still founded on that same principles of a traditional practice that's embraced. And for anybody to say that Hawaiians weren't competitive, we were very competitive. We always were for centuries. Competition was really important, except competition was life and death, you know. And then came the 20th century when the annexationists and Alexander Hume Ford came up with this brilliant idea. And they invited Jack London. And Jack London didn't have money. His wife had money. And that's what they were attracting. And that was the foundation to begin tourism, was having Jack London come write the stories in the women's magazine to attract all the wealthy women of the world to come to Hawaii. And that's how it begins to get started. But it's all of this cultural foundation that really lays out the way it is. Competition on one side and the free spirit of surfing on the other side. And the free spirit of surfing, that's the way we're going to make it, you know, by running drugs. Damn, we ran a lot of drugs. And then the other side was the guys that came up. Yeah, shit, I was pissed off at, you know, I was pissed off at Sean and everybody else, but I chose a different route. I left surfing just as they were arriving. I walked away from it because I was so deeply engrounded in the drug culture of surfing that if I didn't, I was going to die. Just like Rasmussen died. You know, everybody can talk about all kind of shit, but trust me, I know what was going down. And I walked away because too many people were dying. And, you know, I heard it. You know, I heard of everything going on the North Shore in the period between 74 and 76. But I wasn't a part of it anymore. I didn't want to be a part of it. I chose not to be a part of it. And so today, you know, I can walk around and look at what I really call, you know, my foundation of surfing. And that's because it's my traditions. It's my way of life. I was born to surf. Yeah. So, you know, that's the cultures that come together.
Paul.
You know, Tom brings up, you know, some really interesting stuff with that, not least of which, you know, the origins and traditions of surfing, some of which have tended to become a little bit lost in all of the hoopla over world professional surfing. Not that I'm denigrating world professional surfing. I think it's been a wonderful thing, still is. And contrary to some of the opinions that were expressed a little earlier, I think it's just as exciting today as it's ever been, if not more so. I mean, the ability to be able to watch a major world tour contest live on the internet is absolutely fantastic, you know. Anyway, that's beside the point. The point I was going to make was, you know, Tom is so right. You know, obviously surfing originated in Hawaii. I think it's an incontrovertible fact. Was long established there. But the crucible of modern surfing is right here in California for a number of reasons. Climate, reasonably, you know, good weather, beaches, waves, aerospace, because it was out of the aerospace industries we got foam and fiberglass surfboards. And finally, as Jim was mentioning, Hollywood. Hollywood, Gidget movies, beach blanket movies, and the Beach Boys. All of those things gave rise to this first spurt of surfing as a youth culture phenomenon and a fad. That's the springboard. You know, when the first surfers started coming from California and to visit Hawaii, and it's always been like the great pilgrimage, I think, for any surfer. You have to go to the islands if you're going to call yourself a surfer. And the first Californians to do so inevitably brought back with them some of the things that they sort of picked up while they were over there. You know, they came back with the palm frond hats, and they came back with the ukulele, and they came back with the slippers, yeah, and all of that stuff. And, you know, the surf culture in California, as it was in the 40s and 50s and early 60s, was infused with a lot of this Hawaiian, at least the artifacts, and part of the attitude as well, I think. You know, they were laid back, you know, surf first, take it easy, all of that stuff was part of that. And we've kind of, to some extent, lost track of that in the great growth of surfing and its commercialization. Fact of the matter is, I mean, we all wanted, as Jericho was saying, to do, to try to structure our lives around going surfing. So that was the first thing. And the other thing, making a living or whatever, even if some of us, not me, but others became drug smugglers to do it, everything else came second, Today, the fact is that if you get a job with a big surfwear company, you're going to work a 9-to-5 job, and you're going to go surfing on the weekends like all the other suckers, You're not going to get to pick and choose necessarily. The only people who get to do that anymore are the pro surfers. Of course, there's a lot more pro surfers today than there was in the mid-'70s when Busting Down the Door was made, when it was really limited to maybe 40, 50 people max, Today, there's like hundreds of them. That's, I'm not sure where I was going with that, but somewhere.
Oh, I forget what
I wanted just to make a comment about the two movies that I thought also was part of them, and that was they both talked about, or both kind of showed, the commitment with surfing. I think if there's one word that it means when you're a surfer, it's that you've got to commit. You commit when you go over the face of the wave. You commit when you decide to be a surfer and know that you're not going to have the kind of job that everyone else has if you want to surf. And I kind of learned that when I first got the job at Surfer. I got sent over to Hawaii, and one of the guys that was over there, Steve Wilkins, who was a major photographer at the time, took me under his wing as a young associate editor, and he took me down to Waikiki, and he introduced me to this guy, Conrad Kuna, who was he sort of held court where Duke had always held before, and he was the guy that told the stories. He was the beach boy, and at the moment that I got there, I saw this beautiful board he had, and I commented on it, and he said, yeah, that was the board I had with my third wife. He said, yeah, she said to me, Conrad, it's either me or that board. Shit, man, it wasn't even that good a board. And that's when I knew that commitment was a big part of surfing.
He still has his board. Yeah, his board's still there.
I just have this idea, because I want to tie the movies together, there's that dark side, and then there's that other side, it was like the light side with the Bustin' Boys and all that. And, I don't know. I want to tie that together as actually, of course, the beginning of professionalism for us, our crew, and for the kids that are there now. And it was the beginning of the true surf culture, I believe, of what it is today. Everything before this time of the 70s and the board development, like Reno was impressing us upon, and the drugs or whatever, but this was the turning point for professionalism and the surf culture with what it is today. So.
Yeah, I was going to open it up, so Sean.
1946, my late father was attacked by a shark on the beachfront in Durban, South Africa. He went to San Francisco for surgery and then recuperated in Hawaii. He stayed at the Royal, and he met the whole Kahanamoku family. Duke had been his hero because my father was a champion swimmer as well. And Duke Kahanamoku was a hero in our household, and when I grew up, he was my hero. In fact, my son Luke is born on the same day, on the 24th of August, as Duke Kahanamoku, as is Michael Thompson, also born on Duke's birthday. Yeah, so Duke is, has always been a hero in our household in South Africa. And Duke, in terms of the globalization of surf culture, obviously introduced surfing to Australia. And is a great hero. There's a wonderful statue of Duke in Pittwater, in freshwater in Australia. But I don't really read much today about Duke and this wonderful creed that he had in the context of Hawaii. And I wondered whether he is as revered in Hawaii, and he's part of the, his principles are taught, and he's as revered as he is in other parts of the world. And you, as a professor of education, would know this. I was just curious about this fact, because he's been such a powerful...
Well, you know, to a certain extent, I guess I could answer a little bit about that, Sean, is that, one, the ownership of his name, you know, use rights and stuff, don't belong to the family or Hawaii anymore. It belongs to someone that has control over that. So it's really minimized how much we can more or less celebrate him, but we do in August, right? So I happen to be part of it, you know, twice, but I realized that there really wasn't much going on, and this is just my own opinion, right? That most of it was just centered around promoting the hotels and the tourism industry around Waikiki. What I was fortunate enough to do just recently, I just returned from Washington, D.C. A few days ago, where I was asked to come and actually make the boards and other sports implements for the museum that celebrates Duke Kahanamoku at the National Museum of American Indians. So he's recognized there for his great sportsmanship, his sharing the sport and the traditional practice throughout the world. I mean, today in Hawaii, yeah, there isn't much going on. I mean, it's celebrated more in Australia and Africa than it is in Hawaii. I mean, it's just not. I mean, I ask that question all the time. What the hell? What's that?
Who owns it now?
A restaurant.
Our Rigger Canoe Club.
There's actually three entities.
Yes, there is.
There's actually three entities, because I know a little bit about it. It's going to happen in Australia in 2014. And three entities fight over. That's why you've never seen a Duke movie. What a great movie, right? What a movie that should be made about his life and winning Olympic medals. And the reason the movie doesn't happen is because no one can agree on who is actually going to be in charge.
Yeah, you're so right.
Tom, just quickly, isn't there a way to separate? I mean, Duke did exist, and he was a real person, and he had extremely powerful influence. Is there not a way to dichotomize, the real Duke from the marketed Duke in the tradition of Hawaii? Was it just become so distorted because it's become a restaurant chain?
I think, and again, it's just the way I see it and perceive it, is that what is memorialized elsewhere outside of Hawaii is not the business aspect of it all. What's memorialized, and I appreciate, is the fact is that the spirit he brought, right? Mm-hmm. Not only the competitiveness of it, but that you guys, Aussies and South Africans alike, and other people around the world, I am just in shock, is that because you guys memorialize him, celebrate him for that spirit he brought as that we all call aloha today, I mean, we use that word a lot, but how many people really know what aloha means? And aloha, when he says it, is just, it's the coming together of two people face to face, and you're sharing your spirit with one another. And I know that he shared that, and I appreciate, from my point of view as a native, that you guys continue to celebrate that without the commercialization of it all. I appreciate it.
Paul?
I think I can speak. This would be
No, you can't.
This would be an unusual first. I think I can speak for Fred Hemmings in saying that I know what he'd say if he was still sitting up here. He'd say, "Yeah, Sean, you're right. And Hawaii has a terrible track record of not celebrating Duke Kahanamoku and not celebrating its special place in surfing and not getting behind surfing as a pro sport and not creating infrastructure around surfing, which surely is the most important sporting contribution Hawaii has made to the world." I mean, it's one of his hobby horses, and has been, in his long life as a politician. And I think there is some truth to that, isn't there?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
I'd like to say something.
The ambiguity of what it means.
Yes, go ahead, Jim.
In Hawaii, in the school systems, there's no surfing programs.
Oh, no.
They just,
no? Yeah,
maybe
just recently.
PT can tell us about this, but like at the university or any of the junior colleges,
No.
they haven't
sorry.
cultivated
No, I wrote
surfing.
It. I wrote it 5 years ago, the curriculum.
Okay,
Yes.
but it still hasn't evolved, just as we're talking about celebrating Dukes,
Yeah, well,
and here,
the way it is.
Jesus in Jerusalem. Who was he? Another guy with the long hair and a beard. But, here we are, Hawaii,
now you know why they left
birthplace
girls out.
of modern surfing. And they do have that week-long Duke Festival where athletes come. They fly in and spend a lot of money to do water polo, all those sports besides surfing. So it's celebrated. Yeah. Yeah, but I think that brings us also to the idea of surfing is still not an Olympic sport. And look at all the sports that have raveled off of surfing, skateboarding, windsurfing, snowboarding. They're all Olympic, and here we are, the big rogue water sport from Duke Hanamoko, and we're still avant-garde in the Sea of Darkness, traveling, and I think that's an interesting idea to contemplate too.
In regards to the Olympics in 2016, the country of Brazil is planning on doing a surfing exhibition as part of their Olympics participation.
Finally, we've all been waiting.
Yes, this is true, but I just met last week with the managing director for the U.S. Olympic team, and yeah, there is discussion about it, but nobody's really sold on it yet, so there'll be ongoing meetings with the Olympic committees worldwide to establish that maybe.
Do you know why then, that I recently read that kite surfing is in fact going to be in the Olympics, and how that got in before surfing would have made it?
Well, I think the boys that were up here earlier pretty much addressed a lot of it, especially when it came to competition, because a lot of it is, and correct me if I'm wrong, very subjective. Even if you got a criteria that you base things on, it still comes out. It's what the eye sees, right? And every wave is not the same. It's not identical. Everything changes. And it becomes a very difficult thing to judge because, trust me, on one wave, Kelly can be killing it, and then on the next wave, somebody can be just as good, but because the focus is on Kelly, it gets lost in that. So it's really hard. And you guys should address that.
I think that's right. Tom's right. The biggest impediment to surfing in the Olympics is the fact that it's got a subjective judging system and that you can't deliver up every wave the same. The Olympic Committee likes sports where, you get 100 meters, everybody runs the same track with a stopwatch, first guy across the line is a winner. Nobody can argue with that. Unfortunately,
but there are lots of subjective
yeah,
elements
they've
in
always
Olympic
been
judging.
problematic.
It's gymnastics or...
Exactly.
That's why they don't want any more.
That's
They have
right.
so many problems with boxing and gymnastics already with subjective judging. They don't want any more subjective sports.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's one of the biggest, that and the fact that there's not enough countries that can do it. And so for Europe, it's kind of meaningless mostly, and until they develop a wave pool system that consistently can give the same.
I think that's the biggest criteria, PT.
We all know that, but to do the wave pool system, it costs lots of money.
the other meaning of making waves. Yeah.
After about 20 years of surfing, I found a perfect little funky beach town, and did what any surfer would do. I spent all my money and then some, and bought a lot outside of the country, not in Hawaii. Ate beans for a while, etc. At that time, I went down there, and there were 2 small surf shops, one surf school, and 8 years later, there are 17 surf schools, 5 surf shops, an internet presence, and there's a major surf company down there too, and $1 million houses. So obviously the surf culture's had it, and the internet has had a huge impact. My point is that the surf companies are not, for the most part, are not giving back other than for contests. And I want to know, what is the responsibility of someone that is transforming a culture so drastically that what are they supposed to, what is their responsibility?
Moral obligation.
Yeah.
The moral obligation
Right.
to making so much money off
Yeah,
of benefiting
they're
them.
making money off it.
Put it in their back pocket.
Money's not going there particularly. It's,
Yeah.
Well, I think that's actually, that question is a, in surfing is a microcosm of what's happening in our world in general, the commercialization of everything, and the people who have that commercialization making the rules for whatever the culture or the activities are, and how far we want to allow that to go, and how much we want our culture to be richer and more diverse in other ways. So, I mean, I think the question is, I think that's up to surfers. I don't think that the brands can be blamed for what they're doing. That's their responsibilities. What we have to do is not allow that to run us over like a truck, and keep the rich heritage of surfing intact. And that's why we applaud the people who are here, who have come here, and also the people who have helped put it on, because these discussions only happen in places like this.
Sorry, I just want to follow up.
how is surfing any different from any other corporate enterprise?
Well, corporate enterprise isn't any different.
Well, I mean, we position ourselves as being this special, fun-loving culture, but if it's really just about cash in the end and you don't give anything back, it's like what Tom's point about, being an original source. We're just taking and we're not giving and we're not creating, and as Fred said, the future doesn't look great.
Well, just so I can just say something. And you know what, I'm going to call on you right after, just because Ian said something, right? I don't know if anybody caught it, but he said, yeah, I think it was you that said it, that, and then surfing took a dive. The surfing industry took a dive. And they had reached a point, I believe, that was just draining them profit-wise. And at this point, and where I've been standing for many years, because my part in surfing was that I was just an active surfer, very vocal, and I surf good, man. I still surf good today. It's just that, I wasn't, I didn't have that competitive burn in me. That it's, but on any given day, I could outsurf any one of these guys, but competitively, they would just shred me. But the thing is, what's changing today, if anybody stops and looks at the small little movements of the industry to continue to capitalize, is they're slowly fading or kind of distancing themselves from the surfing competitions. It's coming full circle again. And they're slowly starting to move out into this adventurism and to search for surf and to go out and surf for the fun of it again. And they're taking the best surfers today, like Jamie O'Brien, for example. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. We can name them all. All these young guys are now moving away from competition, with the exception of selective places, and going out and just surfing, right? And taking the world with them. Now you can take the world with you, right? To experience it. And I see that as a good thing happening here. Oh, before your question, sorry, the girl back.
I would just like to defend the surf industry because I've worked in philanthropy, and there are giving back in a lot of ways. The Eddie Aikau family has the Eddie Aikau Foundation that really does a lot of great work, and they have a school essay contest throughout the Hawaiian Islands, 7th through 10th grade, for English speaking, or English written and Hawaiian written. And their motto is there is much good to be done. the Duke Kahanamoko's Foundation, there's the Duke's Ocean Fest, which you were speaking of. There's, and I'm blanking on the filters, where surfers go out and do those.
Oh, my nonprofit too, Kanalu.
Kirby has a foundation, so there is giving back on that level, and that just like any other business, they have taken huge hits. If anybody, all those quarterly reports, you can read those, and money-wise, the surf industry and some of those companies took huge hits, but there are foundations out there. There's a lot of the surfers have here and there donated their money to causes. I think Jamie O'Brien, maybe cystic fibrosis or something, one time he was going to win the pipe, that's what he was going to give his money to. So,
Mauliola, you're talking about, yes, I named this organization.
There is giving back in it, and obviously, hopefully that will be expounded upon, but it does exist.
Yay.
A couple of things, John, on that comment. We had a conference at San Diego State University in February called Surfing's New Aloha, the growing trend of giving back, where we had a number of brands come and talk about the philanthropy that they do, which is still probably best described as tokenistic at this point, but at least it's taking place. If you have a look behind the scenes of the Volcom Fiji Pro that we saw at the moment, they're doing some pretty cool things. They've actually partnered with an organisation that we developed called Surf Credits, where you can give back to local communities through our organisation. But what I really wanted to touch on was this idea of surf travel that you talked about, Tom, and I think maybe this is the link between the two films that we might have been grappling with. So we talked about Duke and how he went out and essentially gave away the sport of surfing with a spirit of giving and aloha. And if the first film was anything, it was the growth of professional surfing. If the second film was anything, I think we were left with, okay, the legacy of Boyum is commercialised professional surf tourism. Now, what we haven't had with the advent of surf tourism and us as surfers going out and surfing these waves all around the world is the spirit of Duke with us. But the Mentawai Islands featured in the second film. And that's an area where surf tourism has gone out and given really very, very, very little back to that local community at all. And often with the antithesis of the spirit of Duke. Rather than going out and gifting surfing to the places that we go, in places like the Mentawais, we've been actively encouraged by the people who run those tour operations not to teach the local people to surf, because then they will be crowding out the places that we go to. The Quicksilver Crossing, Jim, I know that in the conceptual stages of that, it was put forth that there should be a study done to look at the development of surf tourism and put together a document which could be handed to the places where fantastic surf was found to say, you guys have got a resource. If you manage it properly, it could turn around the economics of your situation. But rather than do that, the thought at the time within Quicksilver was, well, this is going to make people think that we're being greedy and going out and starting up surf camps around the world. So they didn't do that. Now, if you examine that logic a little more closely, in an effort to avoid being perceived as greedy, the company could be perceived as greedy. So in order to avoid being perceived as something that was being greedy, they decided not to spend money to give a gift to the local people. So I'm just wondering if anyone has a comment on what's going on with this as us as travelling surfers and the spirit of Duke in this modern era that Boyum kind of put us onto with the idea of the commercial surf tourism as we propagate out through the world.
I think I have to respond to you first, maybe, since you refer to the Quicksilver Crossing, and I was the director of that for a number of years and went all around the world with it, and that was the boat that we saw in Michael's movie, The Indies Trader, which was called the Raider in this movie. But one of the things I wanted to say is I think that Quicksilver did a lot of soul searching about what they were going to do, and the reason is, as Paul has pointed out, it's a really complicated scenario and not one that's really one you can understand what the consequences will be at a later time. And frequently, surfers have thought they've been doing good things when they've gone out there in the world, and actually they've done terrible things. Our idea of helping people sometimes isn't what really does help them. So what Quicksilver chose to do was, and this was my responsibility, was to put a marine biologist on every portion of that voyage and to go to every single reef we went to and do a reef check, which was started by a gentleman who actually teaches oceanography here at UCLA, and who created a system by which you could evaluate from the surface to the ocean floor everything about a reef and its health. And we probably did 150 of those with various marine biologists, all on reefs that had never been had any research done on them before, to set a baseline throughout the world. And we gave that to UNESCO, the United Nations group, for their research, so that if someone were to go back to these really remote places that we went to, or unique areas that we happen to be looking with surf, they would have a baseline. They could say, in 2001 or in 2004, this is what that reef looked like. This were the number of fish. This was the kelp beds. This was the water temperature. This was the health of the reef, et cetera, and then have that be a measurement against whatever it was later on. And the reason that they chose that was that it was a very politically neutral and sociologically neutral effort. What we found is that we would go to places and give people things or turn them onto something, and when you'd come back, you'd have Lord of the Flies. And as unfortunate as that is, we really don't know, particularly with our culture, what the effect and what the unintended consequences are going to be on a culture that's never actually experienced any of that. So rather than try to do good and maybe end up not, I think Quicksilver chose to do something that they knew would be unequivocally have a value that would not be in any way a problem later for anyone else. And so that's why they made that choice. Your point is one that's very, very worthwhile talking about, but I also think it's one that's incredibly complicated when we talk about cultures and the interactions of cultures, particularly when they're fleeting or they're not ingrained in one another.
Gene Roddenberry's first principle from the Starship Enterprise, interestingly.
Well, okay, so since you brought that up, relative to Cook's arrival in the Pacific, that was his standing order, and that's where Star Trek gets it from. Non-interference with the natives you come in contact with. But he did anything but, and he was in the Pacific for a celestial reason, right? And so he ends up at, what we call New Zealand today to see that. But I liked your point, because I've been on a project with National Geographic for nearly 2 years, and it's almost based on the same principles, right? Except we're looking at formations of the islands and the reef. So I had an opportunity to do a 6,000-foot dive recently. That was very, very fantastic to see the origins of reef. Yeah, in a submersible. Yeah.
Marianas Islands?
No, off of the Big Island, Loihi, just last September. So.
We're going to make this the last question.
Oh, just a point on feasible things to do. Already in the Mentawai Islands, boats, pay a tax to the villages. The boat guy comes out and collects a little bit of money. So if we wanted to help the village, we could standardize the tax. So just a much larger cash amount is given to each village. So that would obviously make the boat trips a lot more expensive, and we wouldn't like it, and the boat owners would make less profits. But the villages would be a lot better off by doing that. So I don't know if that's feasible. They can do things like build.
No, it wouldn't work. You create more inequity within the village itself, because that's, well, it's not the village that gets the money. It's an individual that gets the money.
Representative of the village, these villages have their own political structure oftentimes. They have an elder, you give the tax to that. You maybe have some worries about some corrupt elders, but a lot of them are just starved for resources. They don't have clean water, they don't have wells, they don't separate their sanitation from their water source, because they just don't have the resources to build a well. So if surfers, if we want to take our responsibilities as not just, an emerging, we're not just surfers trying to pay, keep doing surfing and work a normal job, but now an emerging surf culture with responsibilities for our community, then one thing we can do is pony up and pay up to the villages that desperately need basic infrastructure.
Or the investment in infrastructure rather than straight up cash. The hour is growing late. There's a ton of food upstairs. I hope you'll all join us. Just in concluding, I'll conclude on a slightly humorous note. There was a story this week that Harvard economists were dyeing their hair gray in order to make themselves look more distinguished and to give their scholarship more gravitas. Clearly, I'm not one who has that problem, but I want to say when it comes to surfing, none of the people who have spoken today have that problem either. I want to give a profound thank you to everybody who was involved in putting this together. Thanks so much for being.
Thanks for you guys.